The production of this video was made possible by donors to the Orchestration Online Patreon initiative. Please consider adding your support to the creation of free educational internet resources by visiting our Patreon page linked below. Hello and welcome to the massive open online orchestration course. I'm your instructor, Thomas Goss. Over the next 4 months, we're going to make history. The type of online interactive music education we're about to start is unprecedented. But I've watched the way that composers are using the internet for self-development, and I think that the time for this MOOC is now, June through September in the year 2016. I've designed this course on string scoring to be immediately useful to you in your work, with not just information, resources, and training, but even more, a flexible template of how to shape these educational benefits to your advantage in a practical way. Hopefully, if all goes according to plan, then the course curriculum process will help you to better organize your compositional goals and create opportunities for yourself. That's what this course is. What it isn't. It's not a degree program or any kind of formal education. While it may help you with your ongoing studies at university, it's not designed to complement any existing course. It may adapt to such purposes, and I welcome these open resources being used by educators, whether private or institutional. What else this MOOC isn't? It's not an easy A, where you show up every now and then, answer some simple questions, and walk away with a certificate to put on your CV. This course will give you back exactly what you put into it, because it's all about developing yourself through artistic challenges. Effort exactly equals results. On the other hand, this course also isn't limited to very experienced composers. This is a truly open course that can be adapted to the needs of composers at many different levels of achievement. If you're just getting your theory training and score reading skills together, you can take this course and accomplish quite a lot. And if you've already taken a degree at university, and even had your works performed and recorded, the same applies. Let's take a practical overview of this course now. Here's the information you'll need to know in order to take the Term 1 MOOC. First, let's talk course materials. You'll need an up-to-date orchestration manual. I'll be assigning chapters from 3 different texts: Walter Piston's Orchestration, Kent Kennan's Technique of Orchestration, and Samuel Adler's Study of Orchestration. You don't have to own all 3. The reading assignments from any one of these books will be sufficient. As I've mentioned elsewhere, the clearest and most immediately useful text for a beginning orchestrator is Piston's Orchestration. Kennan's text is also fine if you own a copy, though I personally feel the writing style is the least welcoming to the reader out of these 3 books. If you're a more serious orchestrator, then Samuel Adler's text is the one worth getting. I've uploaded a review of the latest and most extensive 4th edition, if you need more information. But if you already own an earlier version of the Adler, then there's no urgent need to upgrade for the purposes of this course. The 2nd or 3rd edition will do nicely. You'll also need my book 100 Orchestration Tips, which has a lot of practical information on scoring from the perspective of the professional orchestrator and orchestral musician. You can get a copy over on the Orchestration Online website, and I've linked the page in the description below. And finally, I'll be assigning study and viewing of my Orchestration 101 The String Section course on Mac Pro Video and Ask Video, which, just like 100 Orchestration Tips, has a pro composer's view of the craft, with very direct and practical information on string technique and scoring. You should get all 3 of these resources right away: an orchestration manual, 100 orchestration tips, and the video course, because I'm assigning study of all of them starting from today's debut course lecture. And that brings us to our next topic, the MOOC Term 1 schedule. There will be 8 lessons or lectures every 2 weeks, with a couple only a week apart. Every lecture and related video will be announced in every Orchestration Online internet media stream: Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Patreon, and my website's newsletter. The target goal for completing your assignments is the next lecture. So, for instance, today, June 10th's unaccompanied violin scoring assignment should be finished by the second lecture on the 24th. Patreon supporters who are taking this course in order to receive evaluations and readings should submit their coursework by these dates. For them, the last assignment will be due by the 16th or the 23rd of September, depending on their level of support. A final wrap-up video on September 25th will complete the course for everyone who's taking the first term along with me now. But these videos and resources will stay open indefinitely, and composers may take this MOOC at any time and at any pace they like in the future. This course is being released during the Northern Hemisphere summer, when many composers have more free time. But everyone has a different life and a different approach to creative growth. MOOC Term 1 is going to require anywhere from 1 to 3 hours per day of study and scoring to complete over the next few months. That's pretty average for a serious university course. But in the scope of what's required for an artistic career, not very much work at all. All the same, there's no way to fall behind here. Except for the Patreon supporters, there are no deadlines, no grades, and no expectations other than your own. Take the time that you have and the opportunities you're given, and make from them what you can, just like anything else that's important to your life. And what are we going to make from this opportunity? The Term 1 MOOC? Well, you'll be scoring music for string instruments that has a very good chance of being played by professional musicians, possibly even performed by them. The entire curriculum represents a practical progression of learning from experience, starting with scoring for unaccompanied violin. But that's not a simple task. Writing in this way is a real challenge, and requires a set of approaches that take you deeper into your understanding of the instrument. There's nowhere to hide, and not a single note may be scored in a careless way. Once this kind of relationship has been established between your craft and your intended instrument, then we'll score with the violin taking the role of a featured soloist with accompaniment, in this case the piano. This is a very popular genre with composers, but it can also be difficult in terms of texture, balance, and function. The most fundamental elements of orchestration immediately present themselves as a challenge to the composer, and once again you must bring a high level of intelligence to the task rather than just writing off the cuff, at least at first. The next logical member of the string family for study is the cello. Once again, we'll be scoring an unaccompanied work, and yet the cello's individual nature and lower range present both limitations and new possibilities for the genre. The response of the individual strings, the ease of double and triple stops, and the uniquely individual registers all provide ample ground for creative exploration and honing of your craft. This introduction will be quickly followed up by scoring for piano trio, in which piano, cello, and violin all share interdependent roles. Just like the violin-piano duo, this represents a microcosm of a more comprehensive approach to scoring, and several towering works of orchestration have also been adapted with great success as piano trio works. Understanding both violin and cello scoring is a great prelude for the introduction of yet another member of the family, the viola. While its sisters are more ideally constructed for their ranges and techniques, the viola is by its nature an instrument of compromises. And yet these perceived imperfections actually contain within them the key to yet another beautifully unique voice for the composer's imagination. When this outlook is combined with your developing approach to unaccompanied scoring, the possibilities should prove very fruitful. This will also open the door to 3 essential ensembles that are enormously constructive to a composer's craft, not to mention key to making lasting connections with accomplished musicians: the string trio, the piano quartet, and the string quartet. We'll study all of these genres, how the individual characteristics of each instrument translate to specific roles within each ensemble, and how those roles can make the music more cohesive, more imaginative, and more daring, and yet more playable and enjoyable for the musicians who'll perform your music. Before we jump into our main topic of unaccompanied violin scoring, let's define just what is meant by the term scoring itself. It doesn't necessarily mean composing, though certainly composition may be part of the process. Nor does it essentially describe the act of arranging, though that also can have a relationship. For the purposes of this course, the word scoring means the creation of an instrumental part or parts within the framework of a set ensemble. That definition carries within it a certain weight of emphasis that has a direct bearing on the greater topic of orchestration. You can certainly compose and arrange music without orchestrating it, but you can't orchestrate music without scoring it. If I were to describe everything that I do as a professional composer and orchestrator in one term, it would be scoring. I score music, whether it's expanding ideas or reducing them or adapting them, or even completely mutating them beyond recognition. It always comes back to my understanding of individual instruments and their relationships towards one another. There are any number of resources available to the composer about the structure of music. You can study harmony, counterpoint, and form in courses and from texts, and even apps now. There are also many texts on orchestration, some of which have a generous portion of actual scoring advice. I've reviewed several of these: Adler's Study of Orchestration, as I mentioned before, not to mention Lovelock's Elements of Orchestral Arrangement, and Gordon Jacobs' Orchestral Technique. Piston and Kennan also devote over 100 pages each of general advice on orchestral scoring. These books are all great in their own way, but even with the very best of them, there's little time to really get to know each instrument in depth. There's little to no time spent on the smaller forms such as this course teaches, with the result that I encounter many composers who've taken orchestration courses and still feel like they didn't quite get to know the instruments in a very accessible way. So we're going to take that time now, studying each instrument in great detail, and learning its individual strengths and personality. We'll focus on scoring these instruments individually in unaccompanied forms, and then in smaller set ensembles. The direct benefit here is that such ensembles do exist, and often have an interest in performing new works and encouraging developing composers, so your music has a greater chance of going on to being read and even performed. And even if you don't have access to a dedicated ensemble, it's not impossible to put one together and see how your music sounds, and to get direct feedback from the players themselves. That will be part of the subject of our next lecture. Now for the main topic, unaccompanied violin scoring. Scoring a piece of music for a single instrument. What could be easier? From the perspective of a keyboard-based composer, that's certainly true. It's much less difficult to produce a fully formed piece of music when you've got one hand for melody and another for accompaniment. A piano piece can create an entire world of sound, which may be adapted quite successfully to an orchestral arrangement. Even when you've only got one hand of piano to score, it's still possible to create the illusion of two hands through the use of pedal, hand stretching, and individually articulated notes within arpeggiated passages. Individual string instruments don't have this same luxury. They don't have the ability to play any combination of notes anywhere at any time with the exact same effort. What's more, their ability to produce tones relies on the direction and position of the bow. If the next note that's scored is quite far away from the last note, or has a completely different context or left-hand position, then the music can be anywhere from extremely clumsy to impossible to perform. This week you're going to take an enormous bath in reading about string instruments, and the violin in particular. Even if you yourself are a string player, please indulge me here, because sometimes the perspective of scoring can be outside the experience of the player, even though players often know the music in a far more intimate way than the composer. For this course, I propose a 3-step process for using our 3 main teaching resources. First, get a solid audio-visual start with my Mac Pro Video Ask Video course, Orchestration 101, the string section. View the first half, which takes a look at string instrument general characteristics and technique. Then focus in on videos 21 through 25 on the violin, for which you'll have to score something convincing this week. 21 and 22 are especially important for developing a working knowledge of the violin from an orchestrator's point of view. 23 and 24 are more relevant to string orchestra scoring, but they still have a bearing on how a string quartet operates. 25's discussion of solo violin also has some useful information that relates to unaccompanied violin. Make sure that you download the Studying String Orchestration PDF guide that comes with the course, as it has some materials we'll be using with this MOOC. Once you've seen and heard the way that string instruments work, particularly the violin, Then backstop that information with reading in your Orchestration Manual. You'll find many of the same topics organized in similar ways, but with more information than I can fit into a 3-hour video course. Each manual has a general discussion of string technique, followed by a specific chapter on the individual instruments, except the canon, which has its own way of organizing things. Read up on general string approach, and then on violin. Don't get too bogged down with extended techniques for now. Instead, focus on what the violin does very, very well. You need a strong foundation in place before you start to reach for the clouds. Finally, augment your understanding of violin scoring with some inside information in my book 100 Orchestration Tips. Of course, you may just want to read the whole book, but for this lecture, you need to focus on chapters 71 to 76, discussing bowing, finger positions, and lyrical phrasing. Then chapters 79 and 80, which underline certain unique characters of register and technique for the violin. Out of all of this huge jolt of information, I want you to focus on 3 major points that have a direct bearing on unaccompanied violin scoring: bowing, lyrical phrasing, and registers. Let's discuss these now. There's a natural sense of breathing that comes with the best planned bowing that takes advantage of the give and take of up bows and down bows. Whether your piece has no slurs or many slurs is immaterial. The performer will have to carefully plan their way through your intentions and come up with solutions that fit the bow. This doesn't mean that you should be planning things out for them, but you should be scoring in a way that's aware of the simple fact of bowing. As you score read, be on the lookout for how other composers shape their music in this way. This leads directly to melodic phrasing. The violin is treasured for its singing quality, but how seldom do beginning composers actually try to sing the lines that they've written? Often such work can be timid or lifeless, or even worse, pianistic. But here's where bowing, vibrato, dynamic inflection, and register all combine to the composer's advantage, and may easily turn a simple melodic phrase into a devastating emotional expression. Finally, a third point all too easily ignored by those just starting out. Which string is going to be played for any given note or line of music? As you'll see in the resources, the individual strings each have their own unique characters, and can change the meaning of a phrase. For a violinist, the choice of register is far more significant than for a pianist. With all that in mind, let's return to the subject of unaccompanied violin scoring. This seems a very specialized field to us today, as we're so used to the violin's role in combination with other instruments. But in the beginning, the violin was as likely to be heard solo as in any other way. Johann Sebastian Bach's father was an itinerant violinist, going from town to town making a living off of his virtuosity. There's a certain sense of knowingness to Bach's solo violin sonatas and partitas that reflects this family tradition, with the kind of dazzling showmanship intended to impress villagers along with the greater concerns of structure and melodic development. All the same, the intelligence of Bach's violin scoring is unsurpassed. For example, the violin solo parts of his concertos can mostly be played by themselves as perfectly passable unaccompanied works, and still maintain nearly the same level of interest. A single line of music contains an entire world within it, and can stand on its own. That same challenge is before you now in the assignment from this lecture. Let's see how Bach does it before trying it out ourselves. The strongest lessons are illustrated in perhaps his strongest work in this genre, the partita in E major. Even though this is one of the most challenging pieces of solo repertoire, violinists come back to it again and again because it's so well written, and so helpful to their technique. But let's apply our trifecta of scoring concerns for this week: bowing, melodic phrasing, and use of registers. You'll find these quite revealing of how the piece is built to fit the violin, even though it's also been successfully adapted for lute, guitar, and even piano. We don't need to look over every bar of every movement in this lecture, but I'll get you started so that you can learn to analyze in this way for the whole piece, and for other unaccompanied pieces that I'll assign you for study this week. We might as well begin at the beginning with a fiery prelude. Bach's original manuscript is so clearly inked that it's perfectly usable for our purposes, and is still used today by some violinists. Don't be distracted by the appearance of a couple of extra sharps in the key signature. This is an old convention that's simply reminding us that F sharp and G sharp are present at the bottom as well as the top of the staff. Bach uses the whole length of the staff here, and is completely happy with leaving an incomplete bar at the end of one system and picking it up on the next line. Now let's break it down, starting with bowing. Nearly this entire piece is marked with no slurs whatsoever, indicating that it should be performed détaché, with every unslurred note receiving a separate bow stroke. This gives the movement a phenomenal amount of bustling energy, making it perfect for starting the partita by capturing and holding the audience's attention. One outcome of this approach is that those notes which are slurred tend to stand out with a different kind of emphasis, accentuating the melodic phrasing of certain passages, like the restatement of the opening motive. Bach was reportedly a violinist at a professional level of talent, and his bowing schemes are always laid out with clarity and logic. You can see this for yourself by reading the original manuscript side by side with a YouTube performance. Today's violinists tend to respect Bach's markings. That leads us to melodic phrasing, one of the most fascinating aspects of this suite, in fact of the entire genre of unaccompanied violin scoring. How are we to distract from the reality that is the single performer playing a single instrument? Or, to look at it another way, how can one violin fill a room with captivating music for 20 minutes? Bach has all the answers in his scoring. In the Prelude, he solves this problem with driving energy, as we've seen, but also with imitation, figuration, harmonic underpinning, and contrasts of register. All of these approaches are used in the first half a page of the Prelude. The opening motive is immediately echoed an octave lower, suggesting the interplay between two voices. Then two foundational ideas are introduced, a figure in which a repeated fifth alternates with a simple walk up and down from the tonic, and a partial, then full downward run of a major scale. In both ideas, once again, the sense of interplay is suggested, as between notes in the first figure, and the underpinning notes that precede each run. Notice that violinists tend to articulate these notes from time to time with different levels of emphasis, to bring out the sense of multiple voices. The violinist can also achieve this simply by varying the overall dynamic of a repeating passage, such as the convention in performing this opening by playing the second iteration with half the force as the first. From there, Bach develops his material, inverting the backtracking scalar runs to climb upward instead. As the piece proceeds, we can see more and more how artfully Bach contrasts the different registers of the violin, rather than attempting to smooth them over. For instance, an open E string is implied wherever it's used to alternate in the following figuration. This means that the left hand of the violinist must play in a very high position on the A string for the fingered notes. This sets up an immediate contrast between the naturally ringing tone of the thin open string and the biting sound of the foreshortened, slightly heavier fingered string. If you watch a live player along to the score as the music progresses, you'll notice that the left hand forms a chordal pattern, with two fingered notes revolving around the open E. This forces the bow to leap downwards to catch the lower note on the D string with every fourth bow stroke, a very showy yet functional technique. Other contrasts of register present themselves as the piece progresses. In the next passage, a new motive coalesces around fragments of the previous material that starts near the bottom of the violin's range, then slowly makes its way across the strings to spill over again and again. There's more going on here than just figuration that climbs upward in pitch, as it might appear to a pianist. This passage brings home a fundamental truth that is often ignored, though frankly it's staring every composer in the face. Any gesture that covers the range of the violin automatically invokes a contrast of registers in which the different character and weight of the strings plays a role. This will seem obvious to many composers out there with a background in string playing, so my apologies. Yet we must show some consideration here for the experience of some composers from different backgrounds. The most obvious contrast of registers is inherent in the simplest trick of all in unaccompanied string scoring, that of throwing in a single low note on the downbeat to underpin the harmony of the following bar. That's not just a functional concern, but a textural one as well. The low note will have a different quality, as it's likely to be played by one of two lower strings, which themselves have a different contrast to one another. Notes played on the G string will have a greater solidity, even gruffness to them. Notes on the D string will sound gentler. These differences can be smoothed over, to be sure, but I find that a more natural, intuitive approach often results in the most colorful scoring. Notice something else about this masterpiece. Bach holds off on the most obvious, most useful way of implying a group of players until the final cadence, in which he finally employs double, triple, and quadruple stops. Note the extreme string crossing of a low A followed by a high C sharp. Performers interpret this in different ways, sometimes casually drawing the bow across the strings, creating another suggested triple stop as the horsehair catches the open A on the way up. Or they'll interpret it very precisely, or even turn the higher notes into a type of ornament. The rest of the partita should be analyzed with the same care as the prelude. From this point on, double and triple stops become ever more prominent and essential to the scoring. Sometimes, as in the gavotte, the multiple stops are used almost purely for harmonic emphasis, accompanying a similar general approach to the prelude of figuration, imitation, and contrasts of register. But see how Bach scores double stops in the first minuet. The lower voice is a well-calculated independent bass line, with simple but effective counterpoint. The second minuet explores a different technique, with the melody played under a sustained tone. These bars are also freely interpreted by violinists, who tend to change bow direction in a way that disregards some of the marked ties. I feel that this movement harks back very strongly to the tradition of Bach's father, with a very folk type of playing that has stayed with violin all the way to today's fiddle playing. There are many different ways to analyze the scoring of a musical work. The approach that I've established here is just the one I feel works best for student composers who are starting their first attempts at scoring for unaccompanied violin. Using this outlook, you can move on to other works of the same genre and see ever more possibilities revealed on the page. Your score reading assignment for this week, after you've thoroughly looked over the partita, is to move on to other great unaccompanied works. The next step should definitely be another one of Bach's partitas or one of his solo violin sonatas, which are all part of the same manuscript. Apply the same thinking. How is Bach filling up the space for the listener? What's the bowing approach and melodic phrasing? How are the different registers explored and contrasted? Bach was deeply influenced both by German folk traditions and by Italian Baroque composers. But it's safe to say that the Italians weren't influenced by him, at least those of his time. They developed their own approaches through the following century, until their traditions culminated in the person of the great Niccolò Paganini. Your third score reading assignment will be to study that other great collection of unaccompanied violin works, Paganini's 24 Caprices. This is actually a monumental work in both length and technique, and really shows how advanced Paganini was as a virtuoso. Nevertheless, this is more a set of etudes than of lyrical compositions, so I'm not assigning the entire set. How many of these you read is up to you. The minimum study here is the 24th Caprice, a theme and variation set which is legendary, leading to many other sets of variations on the same theme by other composers, including me. All the principles we used analyzing Bach apply here as well, especially contrasts of register. The perfect combination of this virtuoso tradition with Bach's sense of form and artistry is achieved in Isaïe's Solo Sonatas. Isaïe was called the king and even the Tsar of violin playing. Many great composers of his day composed and dedicated pieces to him. But when he composed his own works, he dedicated them to his own virtuoso violinist friends and colleagues, challenges as much as tributes to their individual styles of performing. The very best of these constitutes your fourth assignment, the Violin Sonata No. 4 in E minor, dedicated to the other leading violinist of the day, Fritz Kreisler. It's also ideal for our scoring analysis along the previous lines, as it's intensely lyrical and has very natural contrasts of register. It's also thoroughly marked for bowing and fingering, which is just as useful for us as composers as it is for the violinists. Once again, score read the first movement side by side with the YouTube clip to see how the bowing marks are executed upon the instrument. It's hugely educational. But do you have to mark your own boeings in your scoring assignments? No, you don't, and you shouldn't. That's for the performer. I'll have more details on this topic for you coming early next week in a special orchestration question video released specifically for the MOOC course, Marking Boeings. Don't get this mixed up with slurs, which some people think of as marking boeings. I'm referring to up bow and down bow marks, which many developing composers agonize over unnecessarily. Hopefully the video will put your mind at rest over the issue. Before I sign off on Lecture 1 of the massive open online orchestration course, Term 1, here's your scoring assignment. Please undertake this only after you've thoroughly studied all the resources, read all of the scores, and watched the aforementioned video. Compose a 2 to 3 minute work for unaccompanied violin that, according to all your information, is not only playable but compelling. You may use many of the techniques of the works you've studied this week, but please make the piece more about lyricism and strong scoring than about flashy technique. The trick is to not make one approach be the entire piece. For instance, you can and should score multiple stops where needed, but avoid scoring a piece that's nothing but multiple stops, as if the violin were a guitar or even worse, a pianist's left hand. Or if you feel inspired, like Bach, to write long passages of détaché bowing, give the player's right arm a bit of a rest with some slurring from time to time. When you use any technique, back it up with careful study, and compare the proportions of your scoring to those of the masters. The second aspect to this assignment is that it should be in the style of your natural voice as a composer. No sense in imitating Bach or Paganini or even Isaïe. Nobody wants to play a partita No. 4. If your focus is in film composing, then write a piece that's in the style of a film cue. If you're a concert music composer, score something that you feel could be performed at a concert of your own works. Game music, crossover, and commercial work may also apply here if you use your imagination. Whatever it is that you do score, it should be about you, and not about me or what anyone else wants or needs except the performer. Make the piece something they would love to play. Unaccompanied violin scoring is an open field, with some standout repertoire but still lots of room for more inspired compositions, so give it your best effort. For the initial run of this course, you're welcome to ask me questions directly. Probably the easiest way is below the lecture posting on Facebook or Patreon. The complete details of this assignment will be posted both on my website's dedicated MOOC page and on Patreon with extra exclusive assignments and additional content. Thanks so much for registering and joining this course. Now go read a score!